The GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of today's show, in that transition to college football that I was talking about, I do want to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving, for now, a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. Let's get that graphic out of there. You can see it's a huge support to both me and my fellow podcasters and the network as a whole. But in the future, this could change, and ways of tipping and donating could become easier as I've transitioned to a live show. We can talk about that a bit later. But for now, gsmc.cloud is the way to go in that department. Without further ado, let's jump right into our second segment of today's show. And we're going to be talking about win projections in college football. A lot of people really like this topic because they're always kind of getting into the season, getting hyped, and anticipation is building surrounding all their favorite teams. They just want to know, what do other people think about all these teams? Well, as someone who has loved college football, has loved this era of college football, as it's transitioning to potentially bigger and better things, even though there is a little bit of money involved in that situation. But let's just look at all these wonderful teams who have wonderful talent. Let's start in the Big 12, shall we? The Big 12 is one of my favorite divisions. Maybe not anymore because my favorite team, Texas, has moved to the SEC, but it's still one of the most talented, even conferences in all of college football. And when you include all these teams coming in through conference realignment, it really is going to be a must-see conference. Let's start off with a team that has a primo chance to really win it all. And this team has already been through the Big 12 gauntlet. It knows what it takes to get to the Big 12 championship and potentially win it. And that team, of course, is Kansas State. The Kansas State Wildcats have always been a team, by hook or by crook, has found ways to compete in a conference where they really weren't seen as a team that was supposed to compete in the first place. They never really had the big recruits. They never really had the resources, the budget of a Texas or an Oklahoma. And so they really had to build through trust and cultural identity in their squad to really make a name for themselves. So kudos to Coach Chris Kleiman for building this program and making it a program to be reckoned with nationally and not just in the Big 12. Looking at this year, their over-under is 9.5, and expectations are through the roof for them. I'm going to say I'll take the over here, and here's why. Kansas State has lost a lot of production. They lost their QB, Will Howard, to Ohio State. But when I think about the culture of a team like a Kansas State and what it could potentially be now that this program is in new horizons, and the Big 12 itself is in new horizons. This is the poster child of the Big 12. They aren't going to just play dead for these new teams. They're going to prove that, hey, you have to be here to really understand what the Big 12 means, and you have to play it at this level consistently. And they know that. And all these players coming into their program know that. They know that there's a chip on their shoulder because these are players who were probably disregarded by some of these programs coming in to the Big 12 now. They're probably disregarded by the Oregons. Well, that's a Big 10 team, but still that's an example. They're probably disregarded by some of the teams coming into this Big 12, like potentially Arizona maybe, or Utah, or even Colorado maybe. So these are players who understand what it takes. Now let's look at the team a little bit, especially the offense, because, like I said, they lose Will Howard and that level of production, that level of stability, but they add Avery Johnson, perhaps one of the most exciting players in terms of Kansas State rumors, because you don't necessarily hear about a lot of high-end recruits coming to Kansas State, but he came, Avery Johnson, to Manhattan, Kansas to prove himself, 5-star recruit, incredible dual threat ability, had a fantastic Pop-Tart Bowl, and I'm really looking forward to how Kansas State's now going to play now that they have someone who is this incredible dual threat player. They bring in Colorado transfer, Dylan Edwards, who they believe will be a breakout star at the running back position. They also bring in DJ Giddens, who had over 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. So I really like that setup in the backfield. If Avery Johnson is struggling in the pass game, he has two established running backs to really set it off. And when I think about Kansas State wide receivers, they're not necessarily that popular. Top receiver only had about 430 yards in Jace Brown. But I really like how they're transitioning and they're accepting and embracing the reality that they're losing players. But it's also a positive thing because they're losing players because they built them in their own foundation, their own setup, and other teams are trusting them. So when I think about Kansas State, I think about just grit and physicality and toughness and togetherness and building their program from the ground up. Now let's talk about that schedule a little bit, because it definitely is a schedule that can be manageable, but it's the Big 12. A lot of things could happen on any given Saturday. But the big positives about this schedule, they got two of their toughest opponents, Arizona and OK State, perhaps two of the bigger challengers for the Big 12 title. I would consider like about 5 or 6 teams in kind of that top tier of Big 12 discussion in terms of championship game appearance. And those are two of them. They have them at home. The tough games are the games where you're playing teams that are trying to play spoiler. And this year there are a lot of teams that could potentially play spoiler. They're at Colorado. Who knows if they get caught in that alert, get caught up in the attention Colorado's getting in that program. We'll talk about that a little bit later today in the show. What about WVU? A lot of people are high on quarterback Garrett Green down there, and they're kind of looking to really get back into the public eye. They haven't really been a very appealing team to watch, but WVU is always a tough team to play. They always have a gritty, physical defense, and they're just a weird team on every given season. And then at Iowa State, they have a lot of moxie, much like West Virginia. They're going to want to play the role of spoiler. I really like what I see out of young Rocco Becht. Let's see how he improves this season. So those 3 road games potentially could be slip-ups. But if you take care of business against Arizona and Oklahoma State, you're in prime position to make the Big 12 championship. But let's say you slip up in one of those 3 road games, right? Let's say you lose either one or both of those Arizona and Oklahoma State games, and you slip up at, say, West Virginia or Iowa State. If you're being compared to, say, a 3-loss SEC team, like, say, Ole Miss, or LSU even, or Alabama, do you believe that Kansas State will have the national profile and enough top 25 or ranked wins to really be in that conversation for an at-large bid? Because a 3-loss Big 12 champion is not going to happen. I see a 2-loss Big 12 champion happening, but I don't see a 3-loss. So it's highly integral that they take care of business against all 3 of those teams, because there's very little margin for error for Kansas State in that situation, because they should be in the 9 to 10 win region if they just handle all 3 of those games, and potentially have room for a loss to an Arizona or an OK State, we'll be talking about a bit later. Now, here's the whole caveat with Kansas State. I just don't think that, should they be the runaway leader, let's say Kansas State just goes on a tear and beats everyone they play this season, does the burden of being that Big 12 champion really affect how much progress they can make their first year in the CFP and a 12-team CFP? Because no matter what, I feel like any Big 12 team in this 12-team setting will be an underdog or an outsider. Like, next to the group of five, I would say any Big 12 team entering, whether it be through winning the championship, getting that automatic bid, or through the at-large bid, will have a massive chip on their shoulder and a huge hurdle to clear in terms of gaining the respect nationally that they need. I don't think that Kansas State is necessarily focused on that. I do believe that they should challenge for the Big 12 title, and ultimately they could potentially win it. But how it affects the program going forward, when yes, they want to compete for Big 12 titles, but not at the risk of kind of losing the identity of this chip on their shoulder. Excuse me. But at the end of the day, when I think about Kansas State, I don't necessarily think about a team that's necessarily concerned about going out and winning immediately. I feel like their ultimate goal is just always to win the Big 12 because they feel that's the most achievable. And I don't want them to consider, trying to win the CFP immediately. It will take a huge number of steps for them to be able to get to that point because they're not there yet. The Big 12 isn't there yet. Yes, they're trying to add a lot of teams to add intrigue to the league. But on the national stage, the bottom line is it's always going to be SEC favoritism. Still ACC maybe, but the Big 12 is always on that lower rung. For Kansas State to change that narrative, they need to prove that all of this talk about conference realignment is a moot point. Because if a team that has cemented itself as a Big 12 mainstay wins in the first year of this conference realignment, that will be a huge testament to their character and their will to win. Just get that done, and Kansas State will ultimately start earning more respect than it's ever gotten in its history. That's just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we have another mainstay from the Big 12 that we're talking about, and we mentioned in this segment already, Oklahoma State. How will they fare in the new look Big 12? We'll be right back to talk about them after the break.
Looking for